Charles, how would you feel about me sharing so that since I'm running the first part?
Sure.
Okay, let's share. Okay, gives me a
Yeah,
moment.
that way you can drive as fast as you want. Just don't break any speed limits.
Okay,
Okay, it's 10 o'clock, so we'll start the webinar
fantastic.
once we get back up to the beginning. Excellent. Start. And we'll give a few minutes for our guests to roll in.
And then our start time is at 11.
Okay.
I'll just start. I'm going to start my clock now, but I'm going to lap as we go
Okay.
through.
Okay.
Charles, did you put this on LinkedIn?
Hmm?
Did you put this on LinkedIn?
I did not.
It's okay. The webinar is being recorded, and we'll be able to we'll rewatch it on YouTube, and then if you want, you can put this recording on as a post on your LinkedIn.
Nice.
Alrighty. Well, it's 2 minutes past the hour. If people roll in a little bit late, that's okay. We'll get started. Hello, good morning. Welcome to another Green Energy Series webinar. Today's talk will be about resiliency through placemaking. My name is Edward Louie. I'll be your host. Go to the next slide. A little about Solar Oregon. Solar Oregon was founded in 1979. It is a member-based nonprofit that grew from grassroots efforts to support clean and renewable energy. We support clean and renewable energy through education, outreach, and community advocacy. We have a number of tours throughout the year, including one upcoming, the Go Zero Zero Energy Home Tour on October 5th. We also organize solar campaigns and offer a lot of peer-to-peer education, including the Green Energy Series. Next slide. I'm super excited by today's talk. We have two guest speakers, Heather, who is an owner of Forge Design and executive director of the Architectural Heritage Center, and Charles, who is a senior architect and urban designer at Green Urban Design. I'll let Heather and Charles introduce themselves some more if they want.
Well, I'll do that in just 1 second. Thank you so much for the welcome. I want to let people know that we're going to spend a little time just kind of giving you an overview of what resilient placemaking is and some values and approaches you might bring to resilient thinking and bring that embedded with placemaking. Give you some examples of some templates for resiliency from some of our projects. Some small scale solar kiosks as urban acupuncture, Yahat's Resilient Civic Campus Plan that Charles and I worked on together, and then a larger, really exciting eco-district approach from Japan, Keshwanoha, and give you a few takeaways and opportunities for action implementation, and we'll spend a little time with Q&A. So a little bit about my background. I spent for 5 years working for a national nonprofit think tank for high performance buildings, specifically working on zero energy buildings, educating architects and engineers and local governments about zero energy building, providing tools and education resources. And this is an example of, one of the tours that really, when people could see the solar, they would really get excited and passionate about it. And we've had people change their mind and say, oh, what is a zero energy building? How could I possibly do that? And then once we took them on a tour and they could see it, they changed their mind, said, we got to go do this right away. We need to change our policy. So having that kind of experience of resiliency strategies where you can touch it and feel it has been really transformative. Another project I worked on more recently is Jolene's First Cousin, which is an affordable housing project with a mix of uses and 11 SROs. We were funded by a PG&E Renewable Development Fund to provide a way to offset 50% of the energy of the 11 SRO, single room occupancy, of the formerly houseless resident housing in partnership with Join and Guerrilla Development. So it's been exciting to be part of some of these projects. And then another one that we'll talk about today in specifics is the Yahat's Resiliency Plan, where we got a $100,000 grant to really think about how we could bring resiliency to a civic campus. And we started with the idea of these small scale kiosks as little mini resiliency hubs. You're going to hear that word resiliency hubs more. And we thought about how could we do this on small scale levels, whether it's signage or kiosks or really connecting buildings to get this scalar impact that can be leveraged. So as we think about, as Charles and I are urban designers and planners, we have the opportunity to work in that space in between, that liminal space between the buildings where people interact and connect. So sometimes that resiliency is not just about putting it on the roof. Sometimes people may not be able to see it, but how you can use the spaces between buildings as social and economic hubs for resilience. And that when we have a really thoughtful, intentional design process, we can think about adding in those resiliency factors of refuge, relief, and making that a springboard for recovery after an emergency or hazard event. And how that those interventions, if we plan them right, that can be a catalyst for vital and active spaces. And so one of the things that we really discovered through some of our other projects, we were collaborating with a group that was working on a NIST grant, NSF grant for schools as resiliency hubs. And this concept of power, communication, and access were really important. So if you can remember those three in particular, that how we get a variety of options for durable power and what we're going to need in an emergency for recovery, that communication piece, and making sure people have equitable access to that. Those three things are really critical that often are also the things we need every day, not just for an emergency. So we think about resiliency through placemaking, and I'll talk a little bit more about what placemaking means for those that don't know that term. But really, we're hoping that you'll take away some things about how to use this resiliency thinking to promote integrated design solutions, layering in the infrastructure piece, the recovery, the revitalization to really get to that incredible resilience at a very deep level, much more than you may hear when we're talking about just energy. So those placemaking improvements in the spaces that can support daily life and really embedding that, thinking around where can I get that intersectional stacked benefit and how can I engage the community. So I think our examples are going to show you how we're engaging people to identify what those other regular daily needs are, and that changes how we plan our spaces, both the buildings and the spaces in between, that can also have that intersectional benefits for kind of that sweet spot of three different things. So what placemaking does is it provides this ability to look at how communities can really be involved in the spaces to discover what those needs and aspirations are. The people are going to use it all the time, and how those different disciplines can be collaborative in working to design that built environment and making it creative, often using public art and other tools to inspire people in ways that they might not think is possible when they're just thinking about an energy project. And that really, it's both a process and a philosophy. So it uses urban design principles, but it also can be political because of how we identify with a place and who's in charge and who makes those decisions. So some of the everyday benefits that can also layer in with emergency responses. If you create good solar canopies that can provide assembly spaces, You know, can they serve multifunctional uses for expanded recreation or farmers markets, but also thinking about where's that water going when it's, you know, have heavy stormwater, and also can some of that be connected and collected, and then how we can be using other kinds of elements in the built environment that relate to our local identity and culture. So when we think about from the energy side, what is resilience and recovery, right? The ability to anticipate and prepare for and adapt to changing conditions to withstand, respond, and recover rapidly. Um, so we are really thinking about that adaptive and holistic planning layered in with the technical solutions. So when we think about what the Oregon Department of Energy talks about, it's layer in one or more of those energy systems that help support the essential structures and facilities that'll serve the public. And Charles is going to talk more about that. This is another project I worked on in Eugene, the Sequential Biofuels Project, which has many of those features of stormwater and green roofs and solar panels, but also community spaces that expose people to these ideas on a regular basis. So if we're going to think about, you know, what are those interconnections that we need? We're talking about renewable power, solar, wind, hydro, batteries, how you can deepen that beyond one building by interconnection, and then supporting that recovery with existing backup generation infrastructure. So as I said, it's more than just emergency planning. When you start thinking about resilient placemaking, it's adding in that sustainability, economic vitality, and health. So we think it's a recipe for designing in those big R's: resiliency, refuge, recovery, and how those can serve everyday uses. So this is that trifecta I mentioned, you know, how we activate those spaces, educate the community, and support the economic activity and cost savings can be that sweet spot of authentic and resilient placemaking, the places of purpose that make livable cities. So we think that that can also provide that stability that communities are needing on a variety of levels, providing, you know, access to power and communication, as I mentioned, the digital inclusion, activating spaces like the solar kiosks I'm going to talk to you about, and then also some of the things we've learned about geographic equity, as well as social equity, and making sure we're identifying where there are gaps that we can strengthen. That's a big one with our Yachats project you'll hear about. Of course, supporting adaptation to climate change and that refuge and recovery. So some of the other strategies you'll see in some projects of, you know, some of the soft things like the stormwater and the trees that can provide shading and cooling and microclimates that are critical for climate responsive action, but also where we might be factoring in those cisterns and the EV battery charging and solar canopies that can be used in other ways. So the three projects we're going to talk about today are these small scale interventions, this solar kiosk resiliency hub, a concept that I've been working on in Portland, the Yachats resiliency plan, where we got this $100,000 planning grant from Oregon Department of Energy, and then this larger project in Keshwanaha, Charles will talk about. So I'm going to start with the small scale urban acupuncture aspect, setting my timer here. That leveraging the role of the public realm is this opportunity to activate small spaces in between the buildings that can also help provide a catalyst for revitalization. This one is a Sunnyside plaza that actually there was a lot of accidents and safety issues. And so it became a community gathering space that really brought people together and added small kiosks and became really a vital opportunity for the community to visibly see their goals. And it became an activation for every year replacement and coming together. And so as I've been traveling around the world, I've been seeing these different types of kiosks. So I'll show you some examples of inspiration, but our approach kind of looks at small, medium, and large versions. And they're intended to provide solar on the roof and phone charging and cultural information, wayfinding to the art, and information about the people and the culture of a place, but also emergency preparedness information. So if you can do these small scale structures in the urban environment, you can serve many of the emergency preparedness needs of where to go in an emergency, what other, education and signage and communication you need, that backup power and that energy generation. So this is kind of a cool example that comes in a box. It's collapsible. It's not that costly, easy to install, and has a variety of different options for services. This is the main design that I got really excited about when I was traveling in Lisbon, where they use something in Portugal called the kiosk strategy. And this kiosk not only has a little cafe in the front, but it also has a bathroom in the back. And we realized that this strategy they were using was really fundamental for activating underused spaces and unsafe spaces, parks and plazas. And it also had the benefit of, what if you added emergency resilience to that? So that was providing community resilience on an economic and social level, but now we're adding in this other layer of energy and power resilience. So it has many benefits for these other small business incubation and social amenities, things like that. But we also think it has wayfinding, gateways, emergency response, houseless services, and seeing this kind of trend of an old urban design structure that we used to see all over cities is really coming back. And Lisbon has been bringing back these kiosks, restoring their old ones and putting in new ones. And so these incubator spaces for small businesses, they're kind of like our Portland food carts, right? We've been using the kiosk strategy here in Portland for a long time, but we start to lose them when we develop the land. And so how might we keep that, incubator space for small businesses, but also the activation that happens around that, where you end up with almost a mini plaza popping up. Got great examples in Paris, all over the city, and then this trend again of them bringing back 360 new ones. All over San Francisco, you see a variety of different kiosks, from bathrooms to mini museums to newspaper stands. More examples here in Portland that are unusual and artful. Reuse of other structures. You may have seen this one in the Portland downtown mall, where they've readapted an existing bus station and turned it into a double-sided kiosk. And then a new one here in Portland, modern, as part of an affordable housing project, where they often have a lot of concentration of community activities, free lunches, musical performances, cultural events, and it's really become a hub. And then Parks has an office in there too. So this is our first little baby project. This is a Little Sunshine, our kiosk to resilience, and this is actually in a transitional housing village. And we've just gotten a grant from the Portland Clean Energy Fund, and we're putting solar on top of this. And this is a phone charging bench. So the residents of the village will be able to charge their phones from the solar, but also has cultural and important information about the village and about the project as part of the signage. So this is our second pilot, where it's the mobile art museum as part of the Oregon Muertos project. And we wrote a grant to get the solar canopy and backup batteries, really demonstrating this opportunity. And then we got a grant to do a $46,000 kiosk on Hawthorne as a solar kiosk. So we've been gathering community input on what size, what type, where could we put it. And what we discovered is it was very difficult to locate a larger kiosk. We have narrow sidewalks. And so what's become an opportunity is for us to take what we've designed as a mini resiliency hub with a stockpile of batteries, solar panels, interpretive information, phone charging, to be able to do something where we're designing a bigger piece that can actually be a catalyst for a community plaza. So this is one of our interns has done some lovely illustrations of possibilities. So we're in the process of planning a couple of these. So some small and medium, large versions. And then we've been testing this out in our community, really coming out to the street where people are and not asking them to come to us, and identifying what are those things that can activate the spaces in between, while also adding in a kiosk that can layer in that resiliency. So creating shade and circulation, places to eat, and cultural programming, things that can happen around a kiosk that can really be make that project a success. The programming matters and what you have in there. So this is an example of our sustainability plaza that we've gotten the okay from the Portland Bureau of Transportation to actually close the street right across from the Baghdad Theater on this narrow street to actually start piloting a plaza and then put in a kiosk. So we also are working on another project on the Burnside Bridge under a different hat of the Architectural Heritage Center, where we actually are going to be taking down the Burnside Bridge to have a new resilient bridge, earthquake safe bridge. And there's a great interest in being able to salvage these bridge operator towers. So we're talking about the possibility of actually having more on the waterfront here, looking at how that might serve multiple creative purposes, but also have resiliency embedded in that project. And one of the things that can be important is what are the things around us where you want to work in the areas that aren't working as much, and see if you can make a catalyst change like this. So it doesn't take much, but often there's usually some kind of little structure like a kiosk that things can happen around and that the community can gather. It can be really transformative. We call this urban acupuncture, where you make this small scale intervention and it can have a radiating impact of health. And so one of the things that we want to encourage people as you're thinking about where you locate your solar, where you're going to locate those batteries, is it just on the buildings, or are there places in the public realm that can really be an activator and can generate awareness about climate change and resiliency strategies and emergency preparedness? Where will you go when something happens? How will you get power for your devices? There's a lot of important questions. And so some of the things that we've been learning through the process of both the solar kiosk project and the project Charles is going to talk about in a minute is this idea of these kind of resiliency hubs located in a central visible place near other services where you have that power communication access, good signage. These are the ingredients to that recipe I was talking about that really people want: drinking fountains and place to fill their water bottles. But also, if you don't have power through, say, redeployable batteries, you're not going to be able to refrigerate your food. You're not going to be able to refrigerate those medicines. We need hygiene. And what kind of maybe solar structures can provide that shelter that also has the durable power if you need to take refuge? And then how can you leverage other organizations that already offer those recovery services, churches, and things like that? And what kind of approach that you can bring with a community stewardship entity that can help maintain and adapt facilities to those needs. So this is kind of a snapshot of the things that we heard as we started working on this YAHATS project that was important to communities. And so this is a good sort of like cheat sheet in a sense between the last two slides of these are things that kind of rose up in the process of that people got really excited as we started to think about YAHATS, about how we could not only put solar on the roof and connect batteries, but also could make it an eco demonstration hub that would draw people with excitement and interest to these spaces, but that would inform them that this is the place to meet as well. So I'm going to turn over to Charles. He can say a little bit more about himself, and he'll tell you about the great project that we did with the YAHATS community for their central civic campus plan.
Thank you, Heather, and thank you, Edward. Appreciating the opportunity to share some of the work that Heather and I have done together, and we sort of come together on this strategy because I've been committed to urban design my entire professional life, working at ZGF Architects for 31 years, and creating their Eco District initiative and then exporting it around the world. And this is one of the projects that working with Heather where I could bring back some of that learning, working with the Japanese who are very good at what we're referring to today as resiliency, resiliency placemaking. I think they do it best, and this is a project that benefited from that understanding. So this is kind of a great middle scale project. Next slide that we can consider. As Heather said, it was funded by an Oregon Department of Energy Community Renewable Energy Planning Grant, where resiliency was a factor in selection of the project, which included identifying a project for renewable energy and storage that would make the civic campus a greater asset in to provide relief during a hazard event and help them recover. And the plan really is focused on projects and coordinating those projects in a framework that allows incremental improvement for budget-constrained small cities to make incremental process to strengthen their renewable, their resiliency hub. The city of Yachats is located on the coast. It has 1,600 residents. It grows. It adds about 200 residents during the peak tourist season. And
3,000,
then
sorry.
how much?
3,000.
3,000. So yeah, so it more than doubles with the tourists. And then it includes communities that live up the Yachats River basin, who all rely on Yachats for daily life's needs, and also as a refuge during a hazard event. Next slide. So we Heather and I really reached, and the city reached out to all the folks who use the civic commons or the civic campus as a resource. And we asked them, what is the role of a civic campus and how can it be improved to promote access to services and relief supplies, and promote communication with other community members essentially as a command center during a hazard event. And then how is it supplied with power, and what is the duration of power that can be provided during hazard events during different times of the year? And then immediately pops to the surface is the connection to the water supply and getting pumps activated during a hazard event when the power goes out, and what is a fuel that's available to run those pumps for long periods of time. Next slide. Because the reality is it's not that climate change is creating additional hazard events that are affecting the power source and the resiliency of the city. Drought-induced fire, drought and fire-induced power outages, windstorm-induced power outages, and landslide-induced power outages. Quite frankly, it's acknowledged by FEMA that it's not just the tsunami and the earthquake, but it's those incremental daily infractions on daily life for the most vulnerable who rely on power for refrigeration, medical devices, and other things. Next slide. So that was kind of a context that we had to move through in a project engagement process to really kind of take the context and the aspirations and find the vision, goals, and priorities that form decision-making criteria that allow them to evaluate projects that were near-term and long-term and put them in a timeline for funding that made sense. And that was essentially the value of this plan to coordinate, find that priority project, but also those to identify those later projects.
And we don't expect anyone to read all these words. The point is that we wanted to give you this snapshot in case other people want to replicate this process. This is all the things that we did to understand these major steps in the process.
And I have it on my website, so if anyone wants to go and look at it and dive in more deeply for questions, I'm more than happy to share that with people. So these were the elements that we were working with. There's in the civic campus, it really is an amazing economic and social engine of the community that serves as a refuge. Already, it already has emergency generating power for both the wastewater treatment and the commons. It has all the services that the community relies on, including the coordination with government, who manages all of these services and the daily activities. And they have mobile generators up at the wastewater treatment to go in to charge all their pumps to make their water system work. So it's kind of like the nexus of many of their systems. Next slide. And the opportunity from a placemaking standpoint is to on the one hand look for improvements to each of these buildings that reduce the power demand that power use that they have, and then how do those improvements that we'd use to connect them to an new electrical infrastructure help to improve the reading, legibility, and activities in the landscape that are so also vital to the social and economic objectives of the city. Next slide. So we tested as a thesis all the potential areas where we could put photovoltaic panels, which included those places so that were not held in special regard for the aesthetic and the activities that the community wanted. So that's putting over parking lots, buildings, over industrial buildings, but finding strategically where those things went, and anticipating how we might interconnect buildings on the campus, and where we would add additional emergency generation or storage in the campus. So that was kind of setting the table for the next slide, which again, you don't need to read, and it's in our report, but it's essentially trying to assign the north area and the south area of the campus had different potential. And the next slide shows, some of the greatest potential for giving them low cost revised electrical infrastructure would get them to net positive operation. These were the first project areas that we wanted to focus on. And quite frankly, the South Campus really showed well as a place where the intersection of social and economic and resiliency aspirations was found through an electric system in the South Campus. Next slide. The main thing you have to know is that the solar collection in the coast is pretty poor in the winter months. And so we had to anticipate what the solar collection would need to be. We studied what the solar collection would be to be net positive throughout the whole year, with economy, being with economy in mind, of the cost of building the cost of such a system. And then we had to anticipate what power we needed during the darkest times of the year, the 3 months of the year in January. And so in the north area, because they have a 250 kilowatt diesel generator, quite frankly, you could connect all the buildings up there and they could be resilient throughout the entire year. The only challenge is they don't have enough diesel to run such a scheme. And so renewable power needs to be supplemented. And so we're, as a next phase, we're going to be potentially looking at how to balance the use of diesel and the amount of photovoltaic panels that we need to run this side of the campus. But we are looking at the load and the generation quite extensively.
Sorry, I was just going to jump in real quick.
You mind?
Okay, keep going.
So the next slide is the south, and in this one, it has the greatest potential and flexibility because the load is so low and the value in resilience is so high that we can focus on building electric infrastructure that can give, as a first phase, we can pretty much get to a net zero energy annualized across the total use of the year with about 100 kilowatt PV system, which is about 4,000 square feet or 5,000 square feet. And if we could get to net zero in December or over the higher year, if we tried to achieve the total power demand for 3 buildings, the City Hall, Commons, and Pavilion, if we had a 12,000 square foot panel, and we have 14,000 available. So there's this potential on the south side to start an electrical infrastructure that has a trajectory to net positive. Just acknowledging the cost, trade-offs for trying to do that with with a small city. So the south side, the south edge became our focus. Next slide. And we started to acknowledge the value of 3 major places that could connect, connect to the north, as we planned infrastructure systems on the site. On the south side near the street edge area, it's really an economic expansion of the city market that happens on 4th Street. And then the Pavilion Plaza is kind of like a foyer to the whole district, kind of like a meeting area with a lot of civic engagement and activities occur. And then the park edge is this fixing of the park for different utilities in the city. And the next slide, we were anticipating with the community what these 3 places might look like. Next slide. Acknowledging that our first phase seemed feasible to get 78% of our power demand from CLPUD.
Central Lincoln Power.
Yeah, we could provide all 78% of our power by just simply with $1 million improvement if including the cost of reducing the building energy use by 21%. Next slide. That about 100 kilowatt inverter and battery storage system would achieve that. Next slide. And that in the next step for net positive or net zero net positive really had to include resilience and refuge as a leverage point for why, who cares and why bother spend money on a canopy that provides solar power. Like it would be intersectional with providing a refuge and relief during a hazard event. Just setting aside the money, a mass timber barn really scored the highest as the best place to put money to get a twofer for putting extra solar energy, solar capacity. Next slide. So but we had an alternate, a lower cost alternate that the city asked us to look at because getting partnerships for this next phase would require another grant application and new relationships. But what we highlighted to folks in the next slide is that we also need to be thinking about those improvements that the community raised about trying to add water collection facilities for recovery response and relief, bathrooms for recovery and relief, and then just dealing with site issues and stormwater and parking management that need to be addressed with a sort of a tourism nonprofit kiosk. But these need to be planned for, which seemed to make sense. The next slide. And what we did was we imagined what that landscape would be that connected the economic and social objectives, particularly on the Market Street, making this canopy so that it could spill out with economic activities and perhaps attract a private partner or a group of businesses to co-invest in the project. And we think that that had more value, so to speak, than just putting a canopy over parking that really only covers parking and doesn't give you much return or give you the potential to build partnerships. So we move forward with this kind of idea about partnership building around this urban design concept. Next slide. So the barn could have multiple purposes and attract different partners and provide that relief, having some shutters that you can, or rolling doors that you could pull down to protect you from the rain. So it'd be a little bit more than just a canopy, but could be an enclosure, and factored that into the cost. Next slide. And then just had a scheme for financing so everyone could sort of figure out what their budgets are. So the first phase could be done for under $1 million to get us to 78% of the power that we need, and then had a choice of another $1 million grant just doing a canopy. Doesn't have as much value in the refuge component other than the power generation, or you could add $500,000 and get a cover that adds a lot more intersectional value, as Heather said, with social and economic objectives. Next slide. So in the end, I think this placemaking concept really is about sustaining partnerships, finding ways for them to share costs, and assigning responsibility so that it endures over time. And you'll find that as a thread on every scale. Next slide. And we were able, through this process, as you'll find if you read the report, we were able to connect access, communication, and power to many of the aspects of the improvements into this campus, which was important to the community. Next slide. So I've already covered a little bit about this, but this kind of placemaking approach that connects recovery, resilience, and renewable power in a small town requires a lot of grant funding alignment, and your project needs to be aligned with the grant funding. Community engagement is important. Connecting this network of spaces based on the solar kiosk concept approach. And using that resiliency thinking about recovery and daily use is important. Next slide. What I wanted to do briefly in the time that I have, and I don't have much because I've gone long, I apologize. But that working in Japan, ZGF it was hired to do a placemaking concept that connected the resiliency with the social and economic objectives of the community in a district scale. And this was the part of the the gratitude we can give Oregon to Japan is that our communal sense of understanding the value of open space. Next slide. But essentially, this project, the Japanese government acknowledged that this project could be a test bed for demonstrating how a neighborhood and its design could stimulate and social cohesion and economic uplift, that by the form and at this scale, this neighborhood with that social cohesion and economic vitality could really be a resiliency hub and provide many spaces at the scale of a neighborhood to really tackle societal hazards in Japan, which include such as the Tohoku earthquake as an unplanned natural disaster, but other things like super aging and economic malaise and population decline are things that they saw, resilient placemaking is being able to address in their policies toward urbanism. And Kashimono-ha was the project that they used Portland's help to understand how to do that. Next slide. And they were advanced on the automation side, which I think we all need to appreciate. In that they use data and load management to be efficient during daily times, but then to have access to power during periods of relief, and then power for the period of recovery. They were very good at managing those things with this Hitachi system, which was second to none. Next, and prototyped here in Kashimono-ha. The other thing that, next slide, the other thing that was prototyped
Okay.
Is this idea of the connection of the what we call AI or big data or whatever you want to call it, how it can integrate to support human-centered activities that promote resiliency and social cohesion. And this has been applied as an economic strategy, using urbanism as a way to achieve, to leverage data technology, which they were able to do. But the other thing they innovated here was a coordinating entity of public, private, and academic interests who could convene with the community to help the community establish their priorities on an ongoing basis, to include them in the reprioritization of priorities that are needed in the open space for energy, for water, and for vitality, and for health and well-being. And that's kind of like this next gen of taking your resiliency plan and then operationalizing as an agile concept. Next slide. And in the end, what that kind of iterating with the community allows you to imagine these new landscapes that connect the spaces across the site that contribute to economic health, social well-being, social cohesion, and health and well-being. This project is hyper energy efficient and has the flexibility to spring through hazard events. And it's certified, ZGF certified it as the largest LEED-in-D platinum certified smart city in the world. So just something to hold out there as a guide for where we're all heading on power. So resilience thinking in urban design is absolutely critical. A Japanese project demonstrates that. And you can do that if it's human-centered, it's data-informed, and you've got a coordinating entity that's not leaving anyone behind. And then it's got a system integration allowing you to change the city government regulations and and the way services are provided in a way to optimize the outcomes that you want. So with that, I want to turn it over to our takeaways. I hope you found some of these takeaways in our presentation. Do you want me to do this, Heather, or do you want to do it?
I can talk about it.
Okay.
So, making sure that you're citing renewable energy systems with that resiliency thinking, so it can be a catalyst for the engagement of communities to think, just like the Yachats project was an opportunity for us to not just think about, okay, where we're going to put the solar, but what are all of the other resiliency things that this community needs? And not just in this location, but it brought up an entire conversation about the whole city. There's certain parts that are on another side of the bridge that are harder to get to. So it brought up those concepts of, geographic equity, which is a really important piece of that, and where those gap analysis are. So having that, catalyst of community engagement, like the Oregon Department of Energy resiliency grants, is an incredible tool. And that we were amazed by how we could think about the space between buildings that could provide these other benefits of shade, rain, or wind protection during daily life, but also this refuge and relief. And then that resiliency oriented placemaking kind of connects those community aspirations that serve us as activation and for daily life, but also for the hazard event. So when you can find that financing and that public-private partnership to share the costs, and you identify what those shared benefits and values are, then you can really bring the businesses and local government and residents together to serve both visitors and locals at many different seasons and for many different uses and benefits. So one of the things that we want to make sure we leave you with are some key questions to be asking yourself when you're working on a project and you want to start thinking about resiliency as a layer. So how can resiliency guide your community planning? How do we decide where it's going to go and what it is? So that big chart that showed all the different options we could use. We used a really interesting equity tool. Charles, remind me the name of it.
Relational account.
Relational accountability. And that came out of the city of Beaverton. And it talks about what is equity going to look like at the beginning of the project, at the middle, and at the end. And really, being intentional in the way we think about who decides and who benefits and who are the stakeholders that are involved at the beginning, middle, and end. And how does it support, again, the basic needs in an emergency? And how can it support communities every day? And that you can really get that authentic placemaking through robust community engagement, transparency in decision making. And that allows for a lot more of a process that's inclusive of the beneficiaries. And I love this term. Really, we're trying to create places of purpose. So particularly with the Yachats project, not only were they providing a place that was more resilient and more sustainable and working to create places that would extend the life of their farmers market of more seasons or create places they could have, more recreation in other months and new facilities, but it also became a visible and tangible place for the people who don't know when they're coming as visitors to Yachats that there are many of these hazards. And by having a sustainability hub, as the community got really excited about that as an eco demonstration hub, they will naturally get to see those things and then discover that that's the place to meet in an emergency. So I want to leave you with some of those thoughts about resiliency thinking and placemaking and open it up to questions and answers. And we have more contact information if you'd like to find out a little bit about us. So that's it.
Thank you so much, Charles and Heather. We do have a few questions, but before we dive into questions, I want to do a plug for an upcoming Solar Oregon event. I wonder if you can cue up that slide. Indeed, we have a wonderful event up and coming in October 5th. It is the annual Go Zero Tour. You can find tickets for this Go Zero Tour in Eventbrite. Search for Solar Oregon. This is one of our largest events of the year. We have a number of homes that have put enough solar and conserved enough energy to such that their home is net zero or very close to net zero. And in this tour, we'll get to see, what did they do to their homes to reach that point. And I'm really excited about this tour. Again, you can find the tickets on Eventbrite by searching Solar Oregon. All right, and now we've got some questions. One question that came up is that your presentation has inspired someone to ask you guys whether you're familiar with a land art generator. You familiar with that organization? Or any comments on land art generator?
Love to learn more.
Okay,
Can
so
you tell us about land art generation?
Well, I did a quick Google, and it looks like a effort to basically incorporate photovoltaics into public art, and so that you get that dual purpose, similar to this nexus of one item doing many things
Yes.
that you guys have
Mhm.
really inspired us to think about. Um,
I can
yeah, go
say
ahead.
an example of that actually. I have it in another presentation that is the first solar mural. It's at
Oh,
a
wonderful.
school that actually has an incredible, beautiful mural about the identity of this lovely school, I think in somewhere in the Midwest. And you know, when you can get those stacked benefits again and you make it really visible, it's one of the issues I think when we do sustainability, oftentimes you can't see the solar on the building. You don't get that
Mhm.
you know, really um experiential piece that hits you in a different place than your head, but also in your heart. You feel it, you get excited about it and motivated. And that's where I notice the change happens too. So when you can layer in the things people need every day, you're going to get more exposure and awareness to climate responsive strategies, but also people thinking more about what are the things I need in recovery and in an emergency, but I need it every day too. And so you get all these wins at the same time. So
Excellent.
it's a great concept.
Another question I have is for Charles and Heather. In your projects where you have interactions with the municipality, can you speak to any discussions you've had regarding the placement of structures or solar panels or support structures with solar panels on it, um, which are typically, owned by private entity, but if it encroaches on public lands, such as sidewalks, right of ways, or kiosks that are resting on public lands, how has those conversations gone? And are you seeing municipalities more amicable to kind of these kind of what's it called? Some would say encroachments. Others, I think we would all say that we're actually just improving the benefits that these places between buildings offer the public, but not everybody might interpret that as
I,
such.
I think one way to look at this is that at a neighborhood or district scale where you've got land in circulation that might be owned by the city, if you put it there, it's going to need some kind of encroachment permit or some kind of requirement. And Heather and I have been advising city on how to facilitate some encroachment and what are the requirements that the city would ask for be met that would allow certain encroachments and for how long. And that's a question that all the cities have been trying to deal with since COVID because they were just using the city streets in a much more dynamic way. So I think that door has been opened
Mhm.
quite a bit.
I would like to add to that too. I mean, I think there certainly are barriers to it. You know, for example, trying to locate the kiosk on Hawthorne, you know, really finding the right spot to be able to do
Mhm.
that. If there are rules that you can't vend in the parks or you can't vend in the public right of way, you're missing some of the tools that would allow you to have the economic um, resources to be able
Mhm.
to rent a space that would give you the income for insurance and maintenance and things like that. So I think that there's, again, as Charles was saying, there's an opening of opportunity that has happened after COVID of being able to create plazas in the street, being able to do things that we didn't think we could do before. And so really, I think what's important is to create a culture of yes. And, you know, I love the questions that Charles often says, you know, well, what if? And then if so, how might we? So taking that attitude is really critical thinking, a critical framework to resiliency planning because the old ways are not working. And so we need to be able to really be dynamic and live in our
And,
approaches.
and positive
And
and
positive.
positive. And
Yeah.
it's not, we're not getting in
It's
the way of the
exciting and
future we
fun.
need. We just need to be
Yeah.
excited about the things we can do to get it.
Yeah.
Mhm. Because one kind of like more like neighborhood close to home idea that I've always had for a long time is, why don't we be able to put more be able to do solar panel awnings over sidewalks? Because here in Portland, like we have quite a few days
Well,
of
you can,
rain. People might use the sidewalk and actually go outside and walk around their neighborhood more often if those sidewalks were covered, at least in certain sections.
there's nothing that stops you in Portland from putting a canopy over the street. I think it's encouraged, and the material is not specified. And
Mhm.
but
You can.
if you tried to drop a column in the right of way that got in the way of the flexibility of
Mhm.
Peabody or other, utilities and franchises using a
Mhm.
street, then the question gets larger. But there's, I just, my pet peeve is that you see structures going up in parks, in plazas, in private lands that could have solar on them
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
don't. And so how do we, get all those temporary buildings to have like a rental solar program, that they can go on top and use those things for what they are for the 5 or 6 years of the life of the solar panel.
Absolutely. Like, box store roofs, our flat roofs are perfect candidates. And
Yeah,
Warehouses are perfect.
warehouses,
warehouses,
Yeah, low occupancy, big flat roofs, large
mhm.
expanse.
And park
easy net
exactly.
positive options. Yes.
And then parking lots. I mean, the US
Oh my
has
God, yes.
more parking
Absolutely.
lots than any other country.
And then those could become great refuge places, right? In an
Yes.
emergency, then people can be sheltering underneath them and you've
Mhm.
got power right there. So it's that creative rethinking about those spaces. And
Mhm.
one other thing that we didn't talk about with the ahats that was such an interesting aha is that the library that they have on that site, it turned out was not on the stablest soils and they were going to rebuild it. And so by using this thinking of how could this leverage other economic and social benefits, that Charles and I were able to look at, well, actually, if you put this new library in a different location, it would connect all of these other pieces. And so by using a filter around urban design that connects that, it can actually help shape your design, help shape, an ideal location. And thinking about where those gaps are, it really can create a comprehensive analysis for multi-criteria decision making that is robust, that
Mhm.
gives you these stacked benefits we're talking about. And that's resilient placemaking.
Yeah. And another kind of thoughts or question I think is worth really kind of thinking about is, what is the impact of transportation electrification on the grid? And the answer is that, like, the amount of load that will add to the grid is absolutely tremendous. So much so that if we don't increase the amount of energy generation, the electric vehicles will overwhelm the grid and actually cause more electrical instability than it will solve.
Mhm.
And so, what I've inspired from this presentation is just how much solar you can put in the spaces between buildings, particularly like the Yahats project. That's the kilowatt figures that you presented are quite large, and for initially, I was kind of maybe skeptical that such a space could even fit that many solar panels, but the more I looked at your drawings, the more I'm convinced that you did the math right, and it probably could, it probably would fit.
I didn't do the math right. Mike Hatton from Solar did the math right,
Okay,
and
so
Jim Crumsit from Paradigm Engineering did the math right. And
okay.
I just want everyone to know I'm an architect. I don't play an engineer on TV or in any other space.
But we bring that thinking and that layering of urban design into that too,
Yeah.
that shows like, well, it's not just in the places you think that it should happen. It can actually be connected in these other ways. And one of the other things I think also with, we think about our PBOT organizations, our bureaus of transportation, and they have to deal with the space that is, the street all the way to the building. So it encompasses the sidewalks. And in most kind of zero energy buildings, you're planning some kind of kiosk type structure, usually on the interior of the building, which is not as accessible to the public. That you walk in and maybe there's a cool dashboard about, the energy use, but how do you bring that to the street? How do you share that with the community and make it more visible for them and exciting and inspire people, but also make that really accessible? And then if you layer in and you make them part of it because they can charge their phone on it, or they get Wi-Fi, or they can learn about this inspiring zero energy building, but it's not hidden, and you don't have to have a key to get in. It's there on the street. So when it can be layering in these other benefits, it's pretty special. So I think we're at our
Yeah.
time.
Sure, and I guess we have I can maybe squeeze one more thought and comment into this presentation, which is the importance of managing stormwater and collecting stormwater for either treatment to be able to use for drinking water standard, or just leave it as untreated stormwater and use that for like toilet flushing. This is really important because if we don't start doing this type of stuff more commonly, we will eventually reach a point where we have to upgrade our sewer and stormwater pipes to larger sizes, or find other very capital intensive projects to be able to manage the additional impervious surfaces that are then dumping stormwater into the sewer system. And so if we start really kind of doing the math to value the stormwater management tanks, bioswales, and other things of that sort, then I think we can really start to understand how valuable that synergy is.
It's another thing to do in the space between buildings. Right. And I
Absolutely.
think just holistically looking at that space and using it for all its capacity and nature is really important. And I
Creating
think
habitat.
you
Mhm.
Edward, you make that in very very clearly. Thank you so much.
Wonderful. Well, we are at time. Thank you so much, Charles. Thank you so much, Heather. And we encourage the audience, both the attending and the YouTube audience, to search your website to learn more about your work. This presentation will be on YouTube in about a week or so. And we look forward to people sharing it across their social media networks.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Thank you so
Thank you.
much.
Thank
Thank
Take
you.
you,
care.
Heather. Thank
Appreciate
you,
it.
Heather.